Very good. Thank you.
Sorry. Oh, yeah, sorry.
Good afternoon. 1960, the game of life was rebooted, was revised for its 100th anniversary. And some elements of the game remain the same. The iconic spinner, spin to win, which is part of the game because the creator, Milton Bradley, was a religious man and didn't believe in gambling, hence no dice. I'm sure many of you have played the game at some point in your life. And the reboot of the game of life reflected the norms of the day, the optimism of 1960 and the conformity of that time. Players moved their colored game pieces, their cars, through a path with the hope of a happy retirement in the millionaire mansion or country estates. If you look at the game, there's a shocking lack of choice within that game. There's only a few moments in time where you choose one path or another. One choice that wasn't available in 1960 was a choice to stay single. At a designated spot, every player got married and added a pink or blue peg to the passenger seat of their car. And that was consistent with the time. 72% of adults were married, 90% would go on to get married, and they did so at, again, another shocking age, 21. And a lot has changed since then. We've seen a rise in single living. Nearly half of American adults are single. That's 128 million singles. And it's a pretty diverse group, from 18-year-old college kids to the oldest person in the world and everything in between. The average age of first marriage is approaching 30 now, which is also contributing to that number of single people. And we're seeing a dramatic rise, not just in the United States, but worldwide in terms of one-person households. So more than 1 in 4 households in the United States are one person. That's actually the most common form of household, having leapfrogged the nuclear family, which is currently number 3. 2 adults, no kids is number 2. This is a rather dramatic effect. These are data from Our World in Data, and this is the percentage of one-person households in various places around the world. As you can see, through much of human history, people lived together. And frankly, they needed to. They needed to survive, going all the way back to our hunter-gatherer ancestors. To go it alone was certain death. You needed the community, you needed other people to live with. What we're seeing is this unraveling of marriage and relationship, a particular style of relationship, right? So this is not just people living single, but this is people departing from a particular type of relationship. Relationship that I got this from Amy Guerin, who's a Colorado resident, wrote a wonderful book called Stepping Off the Relationship Escalator. This high status, socially enforced, valued relationship in the world. And even if you have not ridden the relationship escalator, you know it. Your parents have likely ridden it. You see it in television and film. You read it in Pride and Prejudice. You hear about it in love songs, etc. And you're familiar with the progression of the escalator. 2 people meet, and only 2 people meet. They start to date. They catch feelings. They probably have sex. They commit to one another. They move in, likely get married, probably have children, hopefully buy a house, And the success of that relationship is judged by its length. That it ends successfully when one or both people die. Congratulations. That relationship also has rules. The rules are never stated. You never receive a rule book, but you know the rules. And they're likely to feel inevitable. You merge your lives. You move in together. You likely merge your finances. And you merge your identity and lifestyle. You start living the same beats. I call it the benefication of a relationship. Two becomes one, although the Jennifers may change in the case of Ben Affleck. And there are great benefits of this relationship, not just in the United States, but in many places. There are financial benefits. You can get tax breaks. You have benefits with regard to estate planning. There are work benefits. It's easier to get off for holidays if you are part of a relationship, escalator relationship. Married men who have children get raises without a commensurate improvement in their performance, etc. Easier to get housing. Landlords like couples more than singles, and so on. I'm sure some of you have always wondered why you have to put down a pet deposit, but you don't have to put down a child deposit. This relationship should become the most important adult-adult relationship in your life, trumping all other relationships. Your childhood friend, your parents. I had a friend of mine recently married. Matter-of-factly told me that if he were to die, his wife would plan his funeral, his mother would not have a say. And you know, the one alternative to this is parent-child relationships may trump that adult-adult relationship escalator. And then finally, the 800-pound gorilla, sexual and romantic monogamy, right? Which begins, is not allowed to take a break, and by the way, does not, how do I say this? Sorry. The rules of monogamy don't guarantee sex within the relationship, but exclude sex outside of the relationship. Right? So if one partner decides no more sex, then there is no more sex to be had. A good friend of mine told me about how her mother just decided one day, no more sex with dad. And so I said, oh, okay, well, is he allowed to take a lover or hire a sex worker? She's like, no, absolutely not. That goes against the rules of the escalator. And this relationship is high status. We hold it up. We celebrate it with parties, with weddings, destination weddings, bachelor parties, bachelorette parties, showers, anniversaries. Should I go on? There. And so people are funneled into this with regard to its benefits, with regard to its norms. As my father said to me, as I asked him, my mother divorced him when I was 9. I asked him as an 18-year-old, reunited with him, why did you marry Mom? They were a terrible match. He was headed off to Vietnam. He was surprisingly old at the time, so was she. They were in their mid-20s. And he said, matter-of-factly, that's what you did. He never considered another possibility. The feelings about the escalator and us non-escalator riders are pretty clear. I asked 250 Americans, this is a mix of singles and non-singles, about their attitudes from 100, very positive, to 0, very negative, about various relationship terms. This is not all of the ones, but these are some of the highlights. On the left side is everything related to the escalator. All of those things are in the top third of the scale. Everything on the right is related to not riding the escalator to single living. At best, you're at the midpoint of the scale, and the world is really quite hard on single women, as pretty obvious here, with the exception of the most despised group, these young men who are involuntarily celibate, in part because I think, the misogyny and some violence associated with members of that group. So what I want to do is I want to address three, this is we're living in a world where there are stereotypes, where there are myths, there are mistakes about those people, half of the adult population who are not single. As you might imagine from this, they're not always celebrated. They're lamented. And so I want to talk about three of the three sort of general myths or stereotypes that aren't fully backed by science. The first one is this rise of singles. The rise of single living is a symptom that the world is going to hell in a handbasket. The world is getting worse off, and we just need to go back to the good old days when things were right. They were just, they were moral. And as you might imagine, there are religious folks who make this argument. There's a lot of policymakers and government folks that are there. And to be honest, the data don't really bear that out. So there are many reasons for the rise of single living. I've mentioned one already, this delay of marriage. One is access to divorce. So divorce rate, it was hard to get divorced in 1960. Right? So it's gotten easier to get divorced now there. And as a result, when you allow people to do this, they divorce. And by the way, 80% of divorces are initiated by women. The number goes as high as 90% for educated women. So women free themselves of this institution when you give them an opportunity to do it. Another one is longevity. People are living longer than ever, and what you end up having happen is that one member of the escalator dies, and then the other one lives to 108. That happens to be a woman also. And then we get 5.5 years less on the planet than women. Immigration's higher in the United States and also elsewhere. Immigrants are overwhelmingly single. They're the ones taking the risk, coming over, and then eventually perhaps bringing family or bringing others connected to them. And one of the sexier ones that I really like is the rise of technology, of innovation. Is that part of the reason that people are living alone is because they now can. That you don't need two people to run, or actually more than two people. If you go all the way back pre-nuclear age to the corporate family, you don't need two or more people to run a household. You've got washing machines, you've got dishwashers, you've got Uber Eats, and you have one of my favorite inventions, a box in the sky, an apartment. A lower cost footprint where you share amenities with others. Right? And so now you have the ability to do that. Certainly this has co-occurred with the rise of urbanization that's there. So you're just able to do it. One of the biggest drivers is the rise of women. You give women access to educational opportunities, you give them access to economic opportunities, and a non-trivial number of them say, I don't need to do this. I don't have to rely on a man to survive. There was a time in the world that if you were a woman, you either lived with your family or you lived with your husband. And in both of those situations, someone was in charge of the way you lived. That's one of the things that I like about the term spinster, which doesn't get a very positive view in my survey, is actually a really powerful term. Because spinsters had a skill. They could work a loom, they could create textiles that was well rewarded, and they were able to live on their own because they could make their own money. They didn't need their father, and they didn't need a husband. Of course, the world did not like this. Right? Spinsters were degraded, and you couldn't even stay a spinster for long in New England in colonial times because at age 20, I want to say 23, but now I'm worried it's 26, you became a thornback. Does anybody know what a thornback is? Doesn't sound it's like a ray fish with spines on its back. Right? It's not an appealing image. And then, of course, the old maid, right? The old virgin, so to speak. And then the last part, and this is a part that I'm seeing with regard to my podcast, with regard to the people that I'm talking about, is this notion that the potential contagious effects of singlehood. So when I was a child growing up in the 1970s in South Jersey, living in suburban, for part of that time, living in a traditional nuclear family. Dad worked, mom stayed home, have a younger sister. There was one bachelor in my neighborhood, George. George was in his late 30s. He drove a Trans Am. He grew weed in his backyard. Now I think, we thought he was a weirdo, but now I'm like, I think that guy and I would be friends. That's the only bachelor I knew. Right? And so you can live, and this still is the case. I received an email from a young woman who listened to my podcast, and she lives in Oklahoma. She's 21 years old, and she's like, I don't think I ever want to get married. I don't think I ever want to have kids. I said, call me. And I was on a road trip, and I talked to her, and I said to her, do you know anyone else who thinks the way you do? And she goes, I don't think so. I said, you might have to leave Oklahoma. I was like, think about Austin or Denver. So the notion of you have mentors, you have people who are doing it and doing it remarkably well, and you think, oh, there is an alternative to convention. Moreover, the rise of singles is happening in the best places to live. The world's happiest places have the most single people and have the most people living alone. Last summer, I went to the Midsummer Festival in Sweden. I swapped out my Stetson for an Indiana Jones fedora to see the singles capital of the world. And the Swedes do singlehood right. They do it right because they focus and they give benefits to the individual, not to the couple. So you have universal health care, you have unemployment benefits, you have educational benefits, you have free education, all bestowed at the individual level, and giving people further evidence to do this. You're also seeing the rise of singles, even in collectivistic countries. For example, South Korea, which I would consider Seoul to be the singles capital of Asia. Right? Now, some of the forces that are leading South Koreans to go solo is just, it's so damn hard to do tradition in South Korea. It's so expensive to be married and to date and to do all the things there. And so you have this young creative class called the Hanjokes who are going solo. The next stereotype, and I'm just going to do this one briefly, is singles are selfish, the Peter Pans of the world. They don't want to grow up and do the hard work associated with family. They're broken. They don't have what it takes to marry. Now, there is some truth to this in the following ways. There are people who are single by chance, as I call them. They would love to ride the escalator, but they're unable to do it. Right? So maybe they have a physical disability, mental illness, they are homeless, they are incarcerated. Again, these people tend to be more likely to be single. There's a whole host of reasons why people fail to be able to attain this particular style of relationship. It's there. But the data don't really bear out this selfishness and this brokenness as much as you might think. I'll give you a couple examples of this. For example, single people give more of their time and proportion of their money to charity than married people. They're more likely to caregive their parents. Why? This happened to me. My mom became very ill. She had mental illness. I managed to keep her home. I was a caregiver for her from 1,500 miles away, in part because my sister was married, had 2 kids, and was working. And she's like, I can't do it. And so I stepped in like many other singles in that situation. Singles are more involved in their community. So Robert Putnam has this famous book, Bowling Alone. That book always has bothered me in terms of the title and the imagery, because people don't bowl alone. But in it, he talks about the nuclearization of the family, people putting themselves into their suburban homes, sitting in front of television. You know who does that less? Singles. And then finally, there's emerging evidence. It's not something that people have studied very much. Emerging evidence that singles disproportionately contribute to the arts, the sciences, and to entrepreneurship. And some of this is just frankly mathematical. Is that when you don't have a partner and you don't have kids, you can turn your attention to these other endeavors, should you want to do that. Last one, singles are sad, they're lonely, and they're desperate to settle down. Now, one of the reasons why people think that, you're shaking your head, they think that is because the narrative is that marriage, the escalator, is going to make you happy, is this blissful experience that will transform your life for the better. And if you ask people for evidence for this, what they will point out is the following. If you survey people and you ask them, on balance, how satisfied are you with your life? Married people have the highest average. Slightly below them, single people, and below them, divorced people. So, takeaway, get married, stay married, be happy. Now there's a problem with this, and anybody who's a scientist in the room is screaming that's correlation, not causation. And frankly, no one will ever be able to prove that marriage makes you happy. And here's why. Lucky for me, it can't get past human subjects review. Because to do that, you would have to randomly assign people to marriages and randomly assign them to divorces. And then ask them, on balance, how happy are you? There is a workaround, however, and that is there are a few data sets out there that ask people on a regular basis, longitudinally, on balance, how satisfied are you with your life? On balance, how satisfied? And some of those people get married along the way. And some of those married people get divorced along the way. And you can compare those changes. So I'm gonna show you the overall pattern, and then I'll show you the difference between, as a quick aside, the people who advocate for marriage based upon the data that I already told you, it's really quite convenient because they pull the divorced people out of the group, right? They treat them as a separate group. If you combine those groups, there's no difference, right? There's no difference. This is the effect. This is a couple economists find this. So this is average satisfaction with life. This is time before and after getting married. What you find is marriages make you happier temporarily. It's a honeymoon effect, right? So you have an increase in happiness, and then it drops back off to the same level it was before. People who get divorced are less happy to begin with. Now, one thing I'll say is this: these are tiny differences, right? These are tiny, tiny differences. These are big panels of people, so you have statistical power to be able to detect these differences. But these are really tiny differences. And so it's obviously you don't have single people on here because they don't get married here. But there seems to be, if anything, a benefit to being happy and being able to manage your marriage better than not. This idea that singles are desperate to get married and they're sitting around lonely, wanting the one to come along, doesn't bear out to at least their self-report. So Pew Center asked this question 15 years ago. The effects are exactly the same. Of those half of American adults who are single, half of them are not interested in dating or a relationship at the moment. I'm going to say that again. Half of singles are not interested in dating or a relationship at the moment. That is, it's just as normal to want to date as it is to not want to date. But we don't hear from those people. We don't have love songs about loving yourself and staying. We actually, to be honest, we're actually starting to see more of them. But frankly, it's just not part of the discourse. And so you can be a single person not wanting this and feeling like you're the only one because it seems like the rest of the world wants to jump on that escalator. Now, when you ask these people, why don't you want to be dating? Why don't you want a committed relationship? The major reasons they give you are positive. I have more important things to do, right? I'm fighting the patriarchy. I'm going back to school. I'm relocating. I'm caregiving a parent. I have other more pressing opportunities that I'm there. At the bottom of the list are things like I'm too old, I have health issues, I don't think anyone wants me, right? You know, and so I have a member of my community, we're gonna do a podcast episode on that I call Undateable, right? She put it, you know, you've overlooked those of us who are ugly. And the world can be really cruel. And so people take themselves out of the game. So when you start diving into that, the group of singles, you find that it's not a homogeneous group of people. It's not homogeneous demographically, certainly, but it's also not homogeneous psychographically. So there are what I call singles, and these are people who have a conventional view of the world, of dating, of the escalator. I call them someday singles. Someday I'll find my person. Someday I'll be complete. Someday I'll find love. And if they don't, they would look back on their life with regret as a failure of sorts. The remaining three groups I call solos. So I define a solo as someone who already believes that they are complete, that they're not half of a whole walking around. They tend to have a more autonomous view, a more self-reliant view. If I need to do this alone, I will do it alone. As I like to say, they can parent themselves. And then lastly, they tend to be unconventional thinkers. They question the rules. They're already questioning the rules about, is the escalator the right thing for me? But then once you start questioning the rules in that situation, it becomes very easy to start questioning the rules more generally. So you have the just may, is that the first one? Second, right. You have the just may group, which they would like to ride the escalator. They just don't feel incomplete in the meantime. While the some days are hopeless romantics, I call the just mays hopeful romantics. They wouldn't look back on life with regret if it doesn't break their way. There's the no way group, which we've already discussed, 50% of the population. No thanks, not interested for now or forever. And then the smallest group, but I think the sexiest group, is the new way group. These are the folks who would welcome a relationship, intimate or romantic or both, but it's going to deviate from the rules of the escalator in some way. Maybe you don't move in, maybe you don't merge your lives. Maybe it's a less hierarchical type of relationship. Maybe you break some of the rules with regard to consistent sexual and romantic monogamy. Maybe it's non-monogamous. Maybe it's polyamorous. Maybe it's a platonic partnership, etc. Right? There are an infinite number of possibilities within this group. Well, I want to get to Q&A. I want to finish with one idea for the married folks in the room, or the people who will marry in the room, and that is, what can we learn from these solos? How might you make a stronger marriage, a stronger escalator, as a result of understanding these remarkable singles? And I think one is this notion of valuing the individual in such a way that creates interdependence rather than codependence. Right? This notion of being able to parent yourself opens up possibilities within a relationship. So regardless of what your agreements are with your partner, you have a partner who says, I'm happy to make meals, but both people ought to be able to make a meal. Because in the case of death, disability, or divorce, you might find yourself having to make some meals. Same with being able to earn a living, et cetera, et cetera. My mother found this out when she divorced my father and had no skills and had to work 3 shitty jobs with 100% custody of her kids. She was not prepared for that situation, though she was strong enough to get herself out of that marriage. And then finally, this notion of being willing to test the boundaries of a marriage and its rules. The idea being that I have nothing against the escalator. I just want people to opt into it, to agree to do it, rather than default into that relationship. I'll give you one last case, and this is data I asked single and married people about doing things alone in public. And there were 2 sort of shocking takeaways from this. Well, one shocking and one surprising. One is like there are a lot of activities that people are reluctant to do alone in public. The second one is this huge difference between singles and non-singles in doing things alone in public. And actually, these data made me sad for married people. Right? It made me sad for first of all, it made me sad for single people that those numbers weren't close to 100%. Right? And by the way, the data bear this out is that when you go do things in public alone, you enjoy yourself. And sometimes you enjoy yourself more because there's no compromise. Right? So I like this term flaneuring, to walk a city alone. You can't flaneur with 2 people because you're supposed to be at the whims of the city And so the moment you add another person, now you have the whims of the city and the whims of the other person. But I wonder how many of those married people are not going to the concert they want to go to because they don't want to leave their partner at home alone, right? Or you have the compromise movie, right? Rather than seeing the movie you really want to see, or your partner really wants to see, you find the one that you both can stomach for the sake of being together. All right, I think we should stop there and do some questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you for challenging norms. We probably have a lot of questions, and we'll try to get
I think
through as
everybody
many as
agrees with me.
possible.
There's probably no questions, right?
We're going to take somebody else. So back there? Yeah, but if you can wait for
The microphone, please. No, we have a virtual audience that we want to make sure can hear your question as well. Thanks.
I just have a pretty simple question about that last table.
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious with the singles, like how it breaks down by gender, because I feel a lot of women don't want to go out, or people who, identify not as maybe masculine don't want to go do those activities alone. So I'm curious if they broke it down that way.
I can't recall exactly, but my intuition backs up what you say. But I can't recall exactly, but I wouldn't argue against that point, yeah.
Others?
There's one back there.
I'm wondering what you think about the economic pressures to not live alone. For example, in Boulder, a one-bedroom apartment is like $1,800 a month.
Yes.
And a two-bedroom apartment is like $2,000 a month.
Yes, that's right. Thank you for asking that question. So, there's some single advocates in the world who really hammer on this financial side of things. There are something like 1,100 different laws and regulations that benefit married people. And so over the course of a lifetime, that adds up for singles. Not to mention how much single people sponsor and contribute to married people's lives. So I like to say there's nothing more selfish than a destination wedding. I'm being hyperbolic when I say that. But if in 1960, when everybody married, it was fine, right? I go to your wedding, I give you a gift, I give you gifts for your baby shower, et cetera, et cetera. And then when I have mine, you reciprocate. But in a world where 1 out of 4 millennials are projected to never marry, that's a lot of sponsoring and elevating a group of people's, celebrations. Now, I think the issue is this: I believe that living alone is a great luxury. And so there's a mathematical element to it, which is like, you put 2 people under the same house, same roof, they get to share expenses. And that's fine to me, right? Like, you could get a roommate if you want and share expenses. You can do this in a variety of different ways. And so I'm just like, but then you have to live with this person and deal with their snoring and whatever else it is. So to me, it's a fine trade-off. That said, policy is, a lot of the policy that's happening, especially in the United States, is completely oblivious to this. I'll give you two examples. So demand for single residence is going up, but where the building is happening is big houses. And I'm not sure exactly. I'm a business school professor, but I don't know anything about retail. My guess is there's probably something that has to do with the zoning associated with that, and then also profit margins, blah, blah, blah. The other one is did you know that in Boulder, you cannot put 5 people in a house who are not blood related? Yeah, so you cannot create a communal living environment in this city, right? In which you might bring single people together where they have their own room, et cetera, and they're able to share expenses and afford this increasingly expensive city. Now, I recognize probably that came from concerns about students, but nonetheless, that's not fair, at least in my opinion. Is there. So now the hope is this, is you're starting to see a rise in two things. One is like micro apartments, right? So you're seeing like these smaller footprints with bigger communities that are targeting singles. There's one going up in Denver right across from where I live right now. And also these other alternative forms of housing where you might have a plot of land, everybody has their own residence, and they're sort of built around some connections that might be happening that's non-familial. So I'm mildly hopeful that things will start to change with regard to that. Yeah.
I decided it was convenient since she was sitting right here to come up with something to say.
By the way, can I just say this? Your nonverbals through this got me through this talk. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yes.
That's what I'm here for. I was thinking through sort of my mother's version of marriage and my version of marriage as you were talking. I mean, never mind that I'm also a lesbian, and so my whole marriage reality looks a little different from the gender perspective. However, she used to remark to me, wait a minute, you're going to see your friend so-and-so and you're not taking your person with you? And I said, well, no. Because we're separate people and I have like friends and interests that are not her friends and interests. Sometimes we share, sometimes we don't. I wondered if the research is looking into like satisfaction rates depending on behaviors within either marriage or non-marriage. Sort of, in other words, is there some kind of variable definition around if you exercise sort of more self-possessed independence, your satisfaction rate goes up whether you're married or not?
So first of all, congratulations on being able to travel without your partner, Yeah, I don't know. I talk about the difference between compromise and coordination, and I'm a big believer in coordination, right? Like, let's find the things that we want to do together, that we do together well, and then I don't want you to have to compromise how you vacation or what you do for a hobby or whatever it is. I don't know of data that look at that per se. I will say this is that, Esther Perel, this is adjacent, but Esther Perel, this is sort of I think it's in the same ballpark. Esther Perel talks about how do you maintain sexual excitement within a long-term partnership. And one of the worst things for eroticism is familiarity, right? You know what I mean? And so yet the safety and security, the relationship benefits from that, but this idea of having some novelty, some difference, some apartness is also a good thing. And so that suggests there's some benefit, at least in the bedroom, to that. But I don't know exactly. Thank you for that question, though.
One more?
One more? Let's make it a good one.
No.
He had good nonverbals too. All right, it's fine.
If this one's quick, you can go.
I was just curious because you talked a lot about like happiness in single people versus married people, and I guess like I feel like a lot of people assume that married people are more happy because of companionship they have. So I was like wondering what you thought about the role in like friendships in your life and how that relates to being happy and single.
Yeah, I appreciate you asking that question. It's something I overlooked in this talk, especially with regard to the idea of sad and lonely. So I believe there are many ways to live a remarkable life, to live a good life, right? So initially the thought was to live a happy life, a life of pleasure and enjoyment and comfort and so on. Then the next thought was, live a life of meaning, right? Doing something bigger than yourself for others. And so, for example, family comes involved. Like, so anybody who's a parent knows that their happiness, their pleasure may take a hit, but their life is no worse off because they're doing the most meaningful work of their existence. There are other paths too, though. There's a path via achievement, right? You do something bigger than yourself for yourself, right? You win a gold medal, you build a business, whatever that may be. Or a life of engagement, a life of flow, right? Of problem solving, of creativity, of making things that's there. And then, but one of the best predictors of a satisfied life is social connection. And so the marriage advocates would say it's this social connection that matters, but what behavioral scientists find is it's social connection that matters. So the lonely people are people who don't have the right social connection, right? So two things have to happen to be lonely. You have to want a connection, and it has to not be there. So you can be lonely in a marriage because it's not the right connection, and you can be non-lonely alone because you don't desire that connection. There's also a reverse effect, which I think a lot of people experience during a lot of married people with kids experienced during the pandemic, called aloneliness, which is a lack of solitude. And so lonely is a sad condition. Alonely is a stressful condition, right? So we people, it's lazy to say that humans are social creatures, right? Because yes, we are social creatures and we tend to thrive because of our socialness, but the hunter-gatherer got to go gather and be alone for a little while, right? You know what I mean? Like, so, putting someone in a rave, partying with people all the time does not make them happy, right? In the same way that the average, like most people find like solitary confinement to be incredibly debilitating and extremely cruel. That's there. So finding that thing. Single people have more friends than married people. It's not even close. And they do so in part because they need those friends in the way that, we need people that are there. And the other one is that they just are, it's very easy to isolate yourself within a couple that's there. And so, so what ends up typically happening is, the nature of your team changes. And the singles or married people that I feel bad for are the people who want something that they're not able to have, right? That's really it's not the case that one group has it better than the other or something like that. I like to say I'm not anti-marriage, I just think it's overprescribed. And so, maybe I should stop. Maybe I should stop with that line.
Okay, should we let Larry? Okay, we have a break for half an hour.
Let's get this off before.